Growing up in Detroit, Black language always reflected people's lived experiences, their ways with the world. It reflected the culture. It reflected so many things. My parents were big on Black history. They were big on activism. And so, this is how I wanted to be in the classroom.
And it's important to make sure the kids stay focused and not falling out of education because you think they're not talking properly.
However, it wasn't until I started teaching on the east side of Detroit when I entered into what Geneva Smitherman calls the language wars. My name is April Baker Bell. I am an assistant professor at Michigan State University in the Department of English and African American and African Studies. I am a language literacy and English education scholar. The title of my book is Linguistic Justice, Black Language, Literacy, Identity, and Pedagogy. When you grow up in a Black space like Detroit, you're going to hear people speaking Black language. I always marveled at the way that people in my community would use language. For me, Black people use language in a way that was powerful, colorful, and very unique. Marcelina Morgan calls this concept the mother tongue. This Black language is the language that socialized me and nurtured me, and it really taught me how to understand the world and how to participate in it. I started working with students who were communicating in Black language just like me. But I remember feeling pressure by school administrators to get these kids to use the language of school, if you will. And so I do remember this conversation with my students, this myth of standard English. And one of the students said, "What I look like speaking like that? It don't even sound right." And then there were other students in the class that said, "Well, you can't go anywhere talking ghetto like that." And I remember, as a teacher, not having the tools to talk about language politics, not being properly prepared to have that conversation, although I knew the kids were speaking the truth. What were your initial thoughts when you read those two language samples?
It reminded me of someone that's not as educated.
I disagree. That's how you was raised and you grew up with him. I agree with that.
It's the language you use when you're around your friends.
Right. We tend to think of somebody that communicates this way as uneducated. And then you all are pushing on that and saying, that doesn't mean you're uneducated because this is the way we communicate with our family and friends. So now the challenge for me was, dealing with that pressure from school and working with the students who were having real conversations about language and race and language and culture and things that I didn't have the opportunity to speak back to. That's when my research started. What I found out was that many classrooms operated like linguistic and cultural battlegrounds. Students were being silenced and alienated just because of the way that they talk. In some ways, internalizing what I'm calling anti-Black linguistic racism. They were experiencing anti-Blackness in and through their language. This internalization, it's not just with students. My mother have told me stories about how she experienced anti-Black linguistic racism. So then my goal began to really respond to those needs. Like, how can I change, the attitudes that they have about themselves, that they have about their language. Linguistic Justice, the book and the framework, is about Black language and Black liberation. It's really about dismantling anti-Black linguistic racism and white linguistic hegemony, getting Black youth to really feel proud of a language that their ancestors created. Black language was once the most studied and written about language in the world. But here I am, this teacher teaching in Detroit, and I had no idea that this existed. The pedagogy that I'm working with, it's really looking into the history. It's really allowing students to have an opportunity to talk about language and race, the things that they experience. So what happened is, despite that, enslaved Africans created Black language out of the remnants of their mother tongue, like West African languages, and part of the English language to create their own. It's important for me to be in classrooms, working alongside youth, working alongside teachers, and getting this work in the hands of folks that need it the most.
I think it'll help kids know that they can be themselves in the classroom. You know what I'm saying? They can be where they're from, and not be looked down upon based on where they're from or the language they're using.
If kids feel inferior, that they're not gonna learn anyway if you feel inferior. So I don't think it's even just for teachers and kids, but it's for anybody, Black, not Black, and want to learn more. I think that the book is there. But ultimately, my goal is to get them to see the beauty in it, and that there's nothing wrong with the way in which they communicate. That's what the goal of this pedagogy is ultimately to do.